Is your 9 to 5 giving you sleepless nights? The deadlines keep piling up, your ideas get ignored, and every time there's talk of a promotion, your name never makes the list. Meanwhile, there's that one colleague who seems untouchable. He's popular with the bosses, winning over clients, and walking around like he owns the place. His projects keep getting bigger, and his promotions are faster, as if his career is charmed. One day you snap, you've had enough. You pull him aside and you whisper, "What's your secret? How do you do it?" He lowers his voice and says, "There's someone I know. She can change the odds, turn things your way, make life fall into place." He's not talking about a coach or a mentor. He's talking about someone mysterious with strange powers. A bomoh, a shaman, a spiritual healer who can connect you to the other world. But your colleague insists this isn't just any bomoh. This one can tilt fate itself, make you a success story. The cost? Not a token or a gift, but $300,000. Now, most would laugh it off and walk away. But in the 1990s, one man didn't. He stepped forward. He believed. So who dares name a price like that? And what are you really getting into when you say yes? Tonight on Side Notes, we revisit one of Malaysia's most haunting cases, the story of Mona Fandey. The glamorous bomoh who promised power, wealth, and invincibility. And the night those promises turned into wicked betrayal. The following episode contains mentions of death and descriptions of violent events, including bodily harm. Viewer discretion is advised. This retelling is based on publicly available information, including court records, news reports, and historical accounts. If you appreciate this story, do like and subscribe and let us know in the comments. Mona Fandey was born Noor Masna binti Ismail in 1956 in the quiet state of Perlis, Malaysia. She was the eldest in a conservative Muslim family. From an early age, she was drawn to performing, singing at school events and joining small talent competitions. In her teens, she moved to Kuala Lumpur to chase a career in entertainment. There, she met Muhammad Nur Afandi Abdul Rahman, a sound engineer who later became her husband and manager. She was married 3 times, and with Afandi, her third husband, she had 1 daughter and 2 stepsons. Together, they worked to build a stage persona that would stand out in the local music scene. In fact, it was Afandi who encouraged her to rebrand herself with a new name, Mona Fandey, which apparently was inspired by his name. In 1987, Mona released her debut album, Diana, a pop record that blended love ballads and disco-inspired tracks. The album gave her some attention, enough to get her booked on variety shows and small concerts, but it was far from a breakout hit. Her dream of national fame never really materialized. Her songs didn't top the charts, her TV appearances didn't exactly boost her popularity, and newer, younger faces began dominating the scene. By the late 1980s, Mona's career had plateaued, but Mona was not the kind of person who could fade quietly into the background. She liked the feeling of being admired, the way people's attention seemed to linger on her. If the entertainment industry couldn't give her the spotlight she wanted, she would find another path to be someone important, someone powerful. In the 1990s, Malaysia was changing fast. The economy was booming, skyscrapers were rising in Kuala Lumpur, and the government was determined to project strength and modernity. Steering this rapid development was a political landscape dominated by the United Malays National Organisation, or UMNO. Now, UMNO wasn't just a political party, it was the ruling force, holding power for decades. For those inside the party, climbing the hierarchy could mean everything: wealth, status, and influence. But with politics, it was also fiercely competitive. Positions could be lost as quickly as they were won. In that environment, there were those who believed success required more than strategy and networking. Some whispered about other ways to gain an advantage. Want your career to soar? Or to send a curse to your enemy? That's when you called a bomoh. We're talking about talismans for protection, rituals for luck before an election, spells to ward off your political rivals. And this was the stage where Mona Fandey reappeared, no longer as the pop singer struggling to make the charts, but as a bomoh for the rich and famous. Payments came in the form of cash, luxury cars, jewelry, and even land titles. She promised her clients the ability to charm their audience, to command influence, and be untouchable. To someone with political ambitions, that kind of promise was priceless. For a while, it seemed Mona could deliver. Her name began to circulate in certain elite circles, and it was a lucrative career. According to her trial statement, Mona owned a few houses and bungalows, but didn't like to stay at home. Instead, she and her husband loved to stay at hotels whenever they liked. She also had a collection of luxury cars, including a Jaguar, Mercedes-Benz, a BMW. The more opulent she appeared, the more convincing she became. And that is how her path crossed with Mazlan Idris, a man who was ambitious, politically connected, and truly believed that the dark arts could fast-track his political ambitions. In 1993, Mazlan Idris was a rising star in the Malaysian political scene. At 33, he was already serving as a state assemblyman in Pahang under UMNO. Colleagues described him as ambitious and charming, with a knack for networking. But he was not content to stay where he was. He was eyeing a much higher position, Menteri Besar of Pahang, or the head of government of Pahang. And that's when he approached Mona Fandey. Maybe she could shield him from rivals, give him the aura of a leader people would follow without question, and bring him unimaginable wealth. After their meeting, Mona and Afandi made Mazlan an offer they claimed was unlike anything else. A talisman comprising a tongkat and a songkok they said once belonged to Sukarno, the first president of Indonesia. They had sold such items before, each said to carry mystical influence and protection. But this talisman carried a price worthy of its legend, 2.5 million ringgit. Mazlan countered with 500,000 ringgit, agreeing to pay 300,000 upfront and promised land titles as a guarantee for the remainder. On July 2nd, 1993, Mazlan drove through Kuala Lumpur, stopping at banks, withdrawing stacks of cash. To outsiders, it might have looked like Mazlan was preparing to fund an elaborate scheme, not walk right into one. Witnesses say they had spotted Afandi in the passenger seat of this car. That same night, Afandi had accompanied Mazlan to an UMNO meeting, and they both seemed to be in a hurry after. Some people noted it as odd because the event was only for UMNO members. At 11 p.m, at one of the couple's properties, Mazlan delivered the money, 300,000 ringgit in cash, which was about 120,000 US dollars at the time, all in 1,000 ringgit notes. It was revealed in court documents that Mazlan had requested for a bathing ritual that same night. The couple prepared him a flower bath. For the ritual to begin, Mazlan had to first change into a towel. He laid on the floor, his head resting on a plastic basin. Afandi was squatting by his side as Mona put a flower on his forehead and washed him with water from the basin. "Close your eyes," she said. "Wait for the mysterious voice. It will ask you how much money you want to appear." Mazlan breathed in, steady and slow, as if waiting for the promise of something extraordinary. And then the chanting stopped, and the room fell silent. And in that silence, something moved quickly over Mazlan's head. At first, Mazlan's absence raised little concern, but when he failed to appear at several official functions, an UMNO colleague finally lodged a police report on July 18, nearly 2 weeks after he was last seen. The very next day, his wife filed one too. Meanwhile, all around town, Mona was hard to miss. Barely 8 hours after the murder, she was seen cruising in a new Mercedes-Benz, paid for in 1,000 ringgit notes. She refurnished her entire home, from a new TV to custom kitchen cabinets. And in case anyone still hadn't noticed her, she got a facelift and a nose job, which explains her unique look and smile in all of those pictures during the trial. But her lavish streak was short-lived, because around this time, their assistant, Juraimi Hussein, was arrested on unrelated drug charges. While in custody, he let slip a confession that flipped the case on its head, pointing police toward one of the couple's many properties. On 22nd July, then Federal Criminal Investigation Department Director, Datuk Zaman Khan, led the search operations at one of Afandi's many properties, an unfinished house in Kampung Lata Jarum in Rau, Pahang. What they discovered beneath a freshly cemented floor in the storeroom was shocking. The dismembered remains of Mazlan Idris, carefully concealed and cut into 18 parts. Some reports said Mazlan's body had been partially skinned, Police also found an altar with deities, knives, an axe, and Mazlan's own revolver was buried nearby. Mona and Fandey were subsequently arrested. On the 3rd of August, all three were charged with the murder of Mazlan Idris, and all three pleaded not guilty. They were tried at the Temerloh High Court by a 7-person jury in a 69-day trial. From the start, the case drew huge crowds. More than 500 people gathered on the first day alone just to see Mona. With a high-profile victim, a brutal crime, and an accused who seemed to thrive under the spotlight, it quickly turned into a media circus. Mona seemed to relish the attention. Wearing bright, colourful dresses and heavy makeup, she commanded the court with a creepy calmness. Instead of shying away from the cameras and media frenzy, she smiled and waved, as if the courtroom was her stage, and this was the spotlight she had always wanted. Throughout the proceedings, Mona spoke in cryptic phrases, often hinting at her belief in spiritual power. Her husband Fandey was quieter, but appeared unwavering. Juraimi testified that he was only taking orders from the couple, providing details of how they carried out the killing. Remember the night of the ritual? There was actually a 4th person, Juraimi. While Mona and Fandey were performing the flower bath, he was waiting in the kitchen with an axe in hand for a signal to kill the politician. It was reported that he confessed to the crime as revenge after being only paid 180 ringgit for carrying out the dirty deed of chopping up Mazlan's body, while the couple seemingly went on their shopping sprees. The autopsy shared during the trial revealed that Mazlan's neck was severed with a sharp weapon, like an axe, and he died instantly. The trial became a he said, they said clash of words. While Mona and her husband denied being the masterminds of the killing, their assistant gave a detailed account that put them at the center of the crime. The couple said they were not aware that Juraimi had planned to kill the politician, and they fled the scene in panic after the murder. While I was wiping Mazlan's face and forehead, Juraimi entered, and the next thing I knew, a big axe had hit Mazlan's throat, said Fandey. For many, the trial was a spectacle of power, superstition, and dark ambition, and Mona was undeniably the star. Prison officers shared that she would ask for the newspaper of the day so she could read about herself in the headlines. The court ultimately found all three guilty of murder, sentencing them to death by hanging. Mona reportedly said, "I'm happy and thank you to all Malaysians." She was executed on 2nd November 2001 at age 45, and her last words? "Aku takkan mati. I will never die." Even years after her execution, Mona Fandey has taken on a life of her own. In Malaysian pop culture, she is often remembered less as a person and more as a legend, a mythical, ghostly figure that continues to haunt the public imagination. But in that transformation, it's easy to forget that she was also a human being who committed very real and horrific crimes. In fact, in writing the script for this episode, I felt chills looking at photos of her. Mona Fandey was a name I feared as a kid, and that's just how pervasive the story is. Her image with that calm, cunning smile in stark contrast to the horror she was involved in continues to crop up in films, songs, and online chatter. The horror film, Dukun, though fictional, drew clear inspiration from her life and events. The movie was completed in 2007, but its release was delayed for 11 years after being deemed too controversial by Malaysian authorities. It only became available later when the film was leaked online. Rumour had it that while in prison, Mona would leave her cell at night using black magic. The story was so persistent that a group of university students called the Truth Seekers set out to prove that it was nothing more than a myth in 2024. They interviewed the investigative officer and ran such a convincing report that they won an award for their final year project. Why did so many believe in the powers of a bomoh? And why do stories like these take roots so deeply in our collective imagination? To understand why they persist, we have to look beyond the crime itself, into the roots of Malay spiritual practice and how it continues to shape cultural belief. Long before modern medicine reached remote villages, in the pre-Islamic era before the 15th century, Malays turned to their bomohs for healing, protection, and guidance. Now, these figures, sometimes called dukun or pawang, were not only healers, but also fortune tellers, spiritual guides, and even sources of comfort. Their power lay in inner knowledge or ilmu batin and charisma, not just in herbs and prayers. One scholar's account shows how deeply ingrained these practices were. The worldview related to the traditional Malay healer places emphasis not on the technical or practical skills, but more on the mystical ability. The bomoh, as a shaman, communicates with the spirit world. As a psychiatrist, he overcomes one's emotional disorder. With the rise of Islamization in the late 20th century, many began to question or reject these roles. Bomohs who practiced dark arts were cast aside. Many of their beliefs were in direct conflict with the teachings of Islam. For example, Muslims believe that anything good comes from God, not from praying to deities or talismans. So the Bomohs adapted. Many began incorporating Quranic verses into their healing rituals, reframing their work as spiritual care within the bounds of Islam. Over time, the word bomoh took on a negative image, so some preferred calling themselves orang obat or healers. But those who still brewed potions, cast spells, or offered curses were increasingly seen as practitioners of black magic. And yet even today, the figure of the bomoh hasn't disappeared. You'll find them resurfacing in modern life. From the infamous Raja Bomoh in 2014, who claimed he could help find missing flight MH370 with coconuts and bamboo binoculars, to savvy healers selling love potions, charms, and spell-casting services on platforms like Carousel. The fascination with them hasn't gone away. Instead, it shows how deeply these beliefs are woven into our culture, with a mix of fear, faith, and curiosity. And maybe that's why Mona Fandey's story still lingers long after her death. She wasn't just a killer, she became a symbol of our uneasy obsession with the mystical, the forbidden, and the possibility that some powers exist beyond what we can explain. There's something timeless about the stories we hold on to, tales of the mysterious, the mystical, and the unexplainable, and Mona's story continues to endure in that tradition. But the legend of Mona Fandey often eclipses the woman behind it. Sergeant Aziza, the prison warden who cared for Mona in her final days, painted a very different picture. Mona shared stories about her children, her early life, and even exchanged recipes like adding fragrant pandan leaves to dishes, those small reminders of home. Aziza also described Mona as calm, polite, and friendly, someone who treated the prison staff with respect and generosity, even as many officers kept their distance out of fear of her reputation. And then there was her devotion to Afandi. When presented with a chance for release, Mona refused, unless both were freed together. If not, she insisted on sharing the same fate. That level of unwavering loyalty clashed with the myth of her as purely cold-hearted, painting instead a portrait of a woman forced to face her destiny with loyalty and love. In these glimpses, we're reminded that Mona was not just a myth or a monster, but a complex person, capable of kindness, warmth, and deep devotion. Maybe that's why, even now, the legend remains. She embodied a paradox that continues to trouble us, the attraction toward the dark and the mystical, but also the reminder that, beneath it all, she was a woman like any other. Thanks for watching. This was Side Notes. I'll see you in the next one.